We hope you enjoy today's story. I am currently incarcerated in a correctional facility, and this is my final day of incarceration. In fact, I am somewhat gratified to be sitting here at the conclusion of my sentence. I have acquired a great deal of knowledge from the older. The circumstances that led to my current situation are intriguing. My wife and I relocated to a new, opulent residence in an emerging community on the periphery of London. Our new neighborhood boasted a plethora of young, promising individuals, many of whom shared similar backgrounds. Socializing with them proved enjoyable. There were single individuals and couples, as well as those who cohabited without intending to wed. On weekends, one individual would typically host gatherings at their residence. We were all young, energetic, and middle-level managers in various legal firms, advertising agencies, and real estate companies. I was employed as an aircraft mechanic and subsequently attained the rank of chief. However, I soon discovered that I was adept at persuading individuals to expend more funds than was necessary on real estate. I was able to sell mortgages at advantageous rates, which proved beneficial to me. My spouse, Sally, was employed as a junior sales manager at an advertising agency. We were a prosperous cohort, enjoying a comfortable lifestyle. We often convened at the local wine bar on Fridays at noon to discuss the shortcomings of our clients and to offer each other encouragement. On one such occasion, I informed Sally that I would be delayed until 3 o'clock. I arrived at the bar at approximately 4 p.m. The usual crowd was in attendance. Sally was not present, so I inquired with one of the staff members about her whereabouts. She was not feeling well, and Gerald had taken her home. Sally and Gerald were employed at the same agency and were on friendly terms. However, Gerald had a reputation for being a womanizer and for being foolish with women. He had an attitude of thinking himself to be a gift to women, and some women seemed to agree with him. We had all witnessed drunken arguments between Gerald and his wife, Fiona. Because of his, it was possible that their interactions were not merely flirtatious. They had been married for less than 2 years, although they had been in a relationship for several years. However, it was not a union that had been forged in heaven. Sally and I believed that Gerald's ability to attract women had diminished somewhat, with Fiona feeling somewhat disheartened. I drove home in Gerald's car, which was not parked nearby, nor was Sally's. It was likely that she was still at work or in the parking lot of a local bar. Given that my wife was not present, I assumed Gerald would have gone home in his own vehicle. I approached the house with caution and opened the front door. I proceeded upstairs, audibly detecting the sounds of sexual activity. It is understandable that a married man would be reluctant to engage in such activity unless he is directly involved. However, the sounds were becoming more audible, and I was becoming aroused. I was aware that my actions could result in severe consequences, but the pleasure was overwhelming. I retrieved my mobile phone and began recording video footage. I carefully opened the bedroom door to observe Sally lying on her back with a naked Gerald performing oral sex on her bed with Sally's legs wrapped around his back. I recorded a few seconds of video for potential use as evidence in a divorce proceeding and then turned off the phone. My objective was twofold: to cause severe physical distress and to inflict damage. The latter was relatively straightforward. I proceeded to the spare room and retrieved my old cricket bat. I then approached our bedroom and observed that the couple was still engaged in a vigorous sexual act. I abruptly opened the door, and their expressions conveyed a sense of astonishment. Gerald's face registered even greater astonishment as the bat made contact with his chest, causing him to lose his balance and fall onto the bed. I then proceeded to grab Sally by her long hair and force her off the bed into the corner. Next to him, she was shouting, "What are you doing?" as if she did not see Mike. "It is not what it appears to be," she said. "It is precisely what it appears to be. You are, in our bed." Gerald was already standing, clutching his ribs. I grabbed him by his long blonde hair. I then proceeded to pull him by his hair and force him into a chair in the bedroom, commanding him to remain there until the cricket bat made contact with his testicles. I then retrieved my phone and showed him the video I had recorded, informing him that I would send the video to his wife if he did not comply. I then turned to my wife, who was cowering in the corner, and waved the bat in her direction. I then brandished the bat in front of her face and informed her that if she moved, the bat would strike her, resulting in a significantly altered appearance. I was subsequently overcome with repugnant and detestable thoughts. This individual would henceforth fear me and would never again approach my wife. I proceeded to the basement and retrieved a rope, a 5 centimeters wide black ribbon, and wire. The wire was of the kind typically used in aircraft to prevent nuts and bolts from becoming dislodged. It was stainless steel, approximately half a millimeter thick, and similar in composition to cheese wire. Wire threaded through a holder for slicing cheese was also obtained. I returned to the upper floor, where I found Gerald still seated in the chair and Sally still crying in the corner. I instructed Sally to tie Gerald's body to the chair and secure his hands to it. She followed my instructions precisely and then returned to her corner. I then took a piece of rope and tied it to Gerald's left ankle, passed it through his thighs, tied it to the right ankle, and tightened it. His heels were pulled up on both sides of the chair, almost touching his thighs. This was the most unpleasant part. I then took a piece of steel wire. I proceeded to wrap the wire around one ankle, continuing its trajectory down the thigh, around the testicles, and finally, around the other ankle. I then secured it to the rope tied to his ankle. This maneuver effectively restrained his legs, leaving him at the mercy of the wire. Should the wire snap, he would suffer a complete loss of his manhood. I then retrieved my Swiss Army knife and opened the large blade. I then placed it beneath the wire and gazed into his eyes, stating, "Do you comprehend the potential consequences of my cutting this rope?" He responded with tears streaming down his face. I believe he fully grasped the gravity of his situation. I wrapped the wire around his right ankle just once, so that if the rope were to break, it would cause him significant distress but not irreparable harm. My objective was to instill a sense of fear for his genitals. I did not intend to inflict severe physical damage. It would not be advantageous for me to completely crush him. As Roman observed a few centuries ago, I have now instructed Sally to call Gerald's wife Fiona. While Fiona is capable of being impassioned, I have not acted alone. I heard Sally say to Fiona, "Can you come to my house? It's very important." Fiona replied, "I'm sorry, but I'm currently occupied." Sally insisted, "You need to come." I took the phone from Sally and said, "Fiona, I just caught Gerald in bed with Sally. I believe you should come over." There was a brief silence. Their house was approximately 45 meters away. After several hours, I proceeded downstairs, where I discovered that Fiona had forced open the front door. She demanded to know the whereabouts of Gerald and Sally. I informed her that they were upstairs. Fiona proceeded to enter the bedroom with great haste. Upon entering, she observed Gerald tied to a chair. She proceeded to bind his ankles to his thighs with a piece of cheese wire, then began berating him. "What the hell is this? Is this some sort of joke? I told you that next time I'd cut your balls off, and here we are, on the verge of losing them." I was taken aback by her next actions. Fiona snatched the knife from me and slid it under the wire. "All right, you idiot, tell me about every single affair you've had since we've been together," she demanded. He turned pale. She then took out her mobile phone and began recording him. He was unable to provide an argument. It was evident that he was fearful. She then demanded that he reveal the truth, and he began to confess everything he knew about the women he had been involved with, including those from his workplace, neighbors, and friends. Fiona sat on the bed with a look of bewilderment on her face, which soon transformed into disgust. She then looked at me with pleading eyes and said, "Can I have some water? This is too much." I proceeded to the bathroom and brought her a glass of water, which I then handed to her. She stood next to Gerald with a knife in her hand and proceeded to consume the water. He consumed the water in one gulp, presumably wishing it was either gin or vodka. I then turned my attention to him and observed that this was the first time he had engaged in such behavior. I was inclined to believe him, given the circumstances, but I remained uncertain about the details. Fiona then interjected, stating, "All right, you idiot, you're hiding something." Her expression then shifted, and it became evident that she was not convinced. He extended the knife back towards the rope and demanded that he be told the truth. He vowed that if she told him, he would become a unicorn. She promised that he would become more than a unicorn. He then looked down at his genitals and said, "I promise." She replied, "Fine, it was Felicity. You were what, my sister? Did this occur at the wedding from last month?" He lowered his gaze and nodded towards his clenched genitals. He then said, "You promise not to do it." "I promise." "Now, tell me," he said, "what wedding was it?" There were only ours and Felicity. It was clear that a light bulb had gone off in Fiona's head. In Fiona's mind, the memory of their wedding came to the fore. He nodded, his gaze still fixed downward. He nodded again, indicating that there were multiple weddings. He nodded once more. "I will remember this moment for the rest of my life," he said, his voice slow and deliberate. Fiona leaned in close to his face and whispered, "You lied." "I lied." The knife severed the rope that had been used to tie Gerald's legs together. His legs collapsed to the floor, and I observed that the wire had embedded itself into the flesh of his thighs. This was not the outcome that had been anticipated. I had assumed that the wire would split, but then I witnessed a terrible sight. The image will remain with me until my dying day. The screaming was undoubtedly the loudest I had ever heard. I worked on jets with jet engines. A thought raced through my mind, damn, now I'll have to change the carpet and the bed. Then, my trauma response training kicked in. I dashed past him into the bathroom, flipping him onto his back. I was unable to lift the injured area, but I was able to halt gravity. The screams stopped. He either passed out from pain or I knocked him out. I grabbed towels and returned, applying them to the wound. I informed Sally that more towels were required and that an ambulance should be called. I was only able to apply pressure to the wound, and it was at this point that I noticed Fiona holding the phone to her ear. I advised her to stop speaking. There was a brief pause as she listened, and then she replied, "I understand. Keep the body parts cool, not cold, and not in the freezer. I have just the thing." She then pinched my thumb and forefinger and took Gerald's genitals, heading to the bathroom. I considered this to be a good idea, as cold water is probably the best thing we can do right now. Subsequently, I heard the toilet flushing. I was perplexed, wondering if she had indeed flushed the object in question down the toilet. She returned to the bedroom and informed her phone conversation partner that he had done so. She then reassured me that everything was fine and calm. However, there was another pause, during which I was struck by the realization that this individual had not only cheated on me but also had the audacity to do so in front of me. I was determined that he would not repeat his actions. The police arrived shortly thereafter. A young constable entered the bedroom and inquired about the situation. His actions did not stop there, as his dinner joined the mess on my already dirty carpet. Fortunately, the paramedics were more composed and likely had encountered similar situations previously. They were thanked for their assistance and the investigation continued. The paramedic inquired about the whereabouts of the body parts. It was hypothesized that they may have been flushed down the toilet. The response was affirmative, and it was suggested that the woman in question was enraged by the act of having sexual intercourse with her sister-in-law, her own sister, and her own sister's husband. This was the source of her distress. Fiona was then escorted to the police vehicle, and Sally and I were requested to accompany the police to the station after Sally. I proceeded to dress. The subsequent interview with the police was relatively straightforward. I provided them with a detailed account of the incident, including the fact that the wire was not twisted but should have snapped. Fiona then offered her account, in which she admitted to tightening the wire because it was starting to come loose and she did not want to ruin the illusion. She stated that she was simply unaware of the appropriate method for securing cheese wire. However, despite her assertion, it was challenging to prove that she was not responsible for the incident. I was ultimately sentenced to 3 years for deprivation. Fortunately, I was able to secure a favorable outcome with the judge. I later discovered that his wife was unfaithful to him, which might have resulted in a more severe sentence. It seems that my actions in saving his life were a mitigating factor. I ultimately served only 18 months. The charges of causing bodily harm were not pursued, as I pleaded temporary insanity. Upon discovering my wife's infidelity, I was required to seek psychiatric treatment. Fiona was given probation for the illegal disposal of body parts. She was required to undergo psychiatric evaluation. Sally, the innocent party, was not charged. I subsequently initiated divorce proceedings. Sally, who was left without a source of income due to the dissolution of our marriage, was forced to sell the family home. She was also at risk of losing her job due to Gerald's employment at the same place. My time in prison was relatively straightforward, with access to medical care and a decent diet. When asked about my circumstances, I informed other inmates that I had severed a man's genitals after catching him with his wife. While this was not entirely accurate, it conveyed the gravity of my actions and gained me a certain degree of respect. I was released from prison on a bright, sunny morning, accompanied by a train. Having been offered a position in the northern region, I was surprised to see Sally awaiting my arrival. Following the dissolution of our marriage, she had only visited me on 2 occasions, despite the clement weather. She was attired in a trench coat with a belt, and I sensed that this was a scenario I had imagined. I was correct in my assumption. She deliberately undid the belt and gradually opened the trench coat, displaying her naked body except for stockings and a garter belt. The trench coat revealed a generous cleavage as I approached her. She slipped her hand into mine, and we continued walking. She said, "Hello, darling. You're out now. I'll start making up for my guilt. I've booked a room at the hotel just around the corner." I eagerly awaited a few pints of beer after 18 months without it. However, beer was a bit more complicated. I looked at her and said, "Lead the way, my lady." As we walked, she spoke to me as if trying to say everything before we reached the hotel. The hotel, despite the fact that we are divorced, I wish to atone for my misdeed. I love you and I am aware that I made a grave error in judgment. I am unsure of the cause of my actions. I must accept responsibility for my actions. It was merely a casual encounter, it held no significance. Can you find it within yourself to forgive? Please, I will demonstrate my capacity for fidelity. I recognize that it will be challenging for you to trust me again, but I implore you to consider my sincerity. I grumbled indistinctly. Please, just think about it. I came to understand that it was not uncommon for individuals to leave prison and immediately seek lodging at a hotel. She swiped the card, and we proceeded to enter the room. There was a bottle of gin and several bottles of tonic on the dresser. She smiled and said, "You may as well get undressed while I prepare drinks." There was no subtlety in her words. I enjoyed the gin and then removed her coat and tossed it onto the bed. After engaging in sexual intercourse, I rolled off her and said, "Thank you. I enjoyed that." I took a sip from my glass and then looked at her. She inquired as to my opinion regarding the subsequent course of action. In my arms, she gazed into my eyes and stated, "I am aware that I am responsible for causing you pain. I should have declined, but I became overly enthusiastic, and I am committed to ensuring that such an incident will not recur. I can assure you of that, but I heard you say that he was superior to me. In fact, he was not as accomplished as you. He was, at best, mediocre. I attempted to enhance his self-esteem so that he could perform better. He is not even as skilled as you." I realized that I had jeopardized our marriage for a fleeting pleasure. Moreover, he was not even as accomplished as I am. That is quite disappointing. I recognize that I was in the wrong. It was an error on my part. What must I do to regain your trust and be reinstated in your life? For the past 18 months, I have been celibate. I am not seeking another relationship. I am only interested in you. I understand that it will be challenging for you to forgive me. I am uncertain as to whether you will do so. If it is possible for you to do so, I would appreciate it if you would refrain from repeating the same mistake twice. I am unlikely to make the same mistake twice. I would like to request that we try to work things out. I would like to suggest that we at least try to communicate. When you work as a real estate agent and a manager, I attempted to discern her intentions by observing her actions and words. Upon seeing her, I stated that I believed I had recuperated sufficiently. We proceeded to engage in sexual intercourse once more. I was offered a position, and I excused myself to the bathroom to shower. Upon returning, I could discern her desire for further sexual activity. I observed the time and began dressing, instructing her to kneel so that we were eye to eye. She informed me that she was departing. I looked at her, and she appeared embarrassed but attractive. Her breasts were visible. Her beauty was unchanging, as it had been 18 months prior. I found myself contemplating the prospect of having her as a daily companion, and of taking her as I pleased. I was on my way to catch a train, but I paused to reply, they found me a position in a real estate agency in Merseyside while I was incarcerated. Currently, it is merely administrative, but I believe I can make it work. I will consider your proposal by then. I was already attired and reached the door. I glanced back at her and said, it would be more straightforward for me to decide in your favor if you apologized. I heard. She replied in the negative as I closed the door. I subsequently made the decision to take the train to Lincoln and resume my position as an aircraft mechanic. While the remuneration was less than that offered by the real estate agency, the individuals in the latter were less agreeable. The last I heard of Fiona was that she was dating a biker, and Gerald was now known as Geraldine, not Jerry, nor Jay, but Geraldine. I would like to express my gratitude for your attention and for listening to the end. If you found this account interesting, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment.